Any thoughts about Since You Went Away, Part 2?
I'm glad Tony's gone.
You're glad Tony's gone? He was a disruptive force in the family.
I hope he does not come back.
I think he's gonna die.
You think Tony's gonna die?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I think he could represent the father figure who does die, since according to the Hays Code, they can't kill off the father. He has to return.
Mhm.
So that would make sense because it's.
I'm actually not sure if they couldn't kill off the father, but they can't like have a marriage separate. But I'm not sure if they could kill him or not. I think they probably could kill him. I mean, that's legal. Just divorce is illegal. Murder is legal.
I also think it's like interesting if Tony were the one to die, it would make sense for a propaganda film because he was the one that was against it, but he would like die a heroic death for his country, and even though he had some reservations, like he still proved himself to the country. I also like how Tony also let down the oldest daughter, and it was just in a teasing way, being like, man, I don't like you like that, but still write me, like,
Kelly.
I didn't like how, like, Rosalia the entire time was being very understandably distrustful and not liking this dude because he's weird and creepy. And then he hands her a portrait and she's like, I was wrong about you.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of Hollywood infantilizing African Americans, which is, sad.
See, she was being very reasonable about this dude, and nobody else was being reasonable about this dude, and then she's like, it was like just a sketch. I'm like, that wasn't a sketch.
I think the oldest daughter's relationship with Bill is really interesting, especially because she flat out said, like, you're a really feminized dude. Like, you're not how you're supposed to be. You should have been an officer. Why not? So her calling him out like that was really interesting because that's not what she should have done.
Yeah, what do you think about Bill?
I honestly feel like he's one of the few decent guys in this movie so far. It's like Tony's the one who gets like showered with praise, and I was like, no, this guy's the one who's the actual decent person.
If I'm assuming Bill goes toward, he's either going to die or come back a man. So that's what's going on. But I feel really bad for that poor guy. Seems like he's had a hard time.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that people police his masculinity more than he does, and that's reflected in a lot of the conversations that he has. And when he tries to project his own masculinity, he inevitably fails, like with the Navy guy, how he was trying to be all tough and shit, and then just falls and knocks himself out.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I feel like that scene could be seen in like multiple angles. Like one is like they're both fighting over this girl's attention, and then like I think another one is kind of that thing of like he's trying to be masculine, but then like fails really really hard. And it's like he doesn't bowl well when the other people are watching. So he gets distracted when people aren't watching.
Yeah.
And then it's like he like literally falls over and has to be helped up. But also, like I wondered a little bit if that was like if he did that to get her attention or something. Cause like she did like right after that come say to the other guy like kind of why did you do that to him? So like I wonder in part if he did that as a way of getting her affection. In a way.
I think it represented both him, like fighting over, both of them fighting over the girl and him displaying his masculinity, because in a way he felt possessive over her because he's the one that took her on a date, and he felt like it was an affront to his masculinity when this guy was making fun of him and talking to his girl that he took out. How dare somebody else have a conversation with another person? So then he started some shit.
Any thoughts about the mother, Anne?
I understand this is like definitely written just to, like as like propaganda and as it like things being like perfect in the way they are. But it's very interesting how I'm questioning and how like just okay the mother is with everything going on. And like putting on like the face of being, I'm perfectly fine all the time, but even in like the first scene we see that like she can't like show that she's crying and sad about her husband going away.
Right. Yeah, I mean, she definitely is. Everything she does is performing for everybody else, right? She's just taking care of everybody else with no real care for herself. Okay, so we've got some predictions. We've got either Bill comes back a man or dies. We've got Tony dies. Want to predict anyone else dying?
Oh my gosh, does she die of mumps? Is that allowed?
Under the Hays Code, yeah, a child can die.
Okay.
They don't care about kids.
Shirley Temple gets the mumps
Ah.
from her sister
I can see
and
that
dies.
happening.
You have a thought?
I mean, just realistically, Tony was like way too close.
Uh-huh.
Like it realistically would make sense if he got the mumps because he's immune.
He's immune. He had mumps.
But I mean, I feel like I'm probably might have just been worrying about that. To be honest, to just get close to her because like that's something you do. So if he's immune, good for him. But he also might have just been lying. That's kind of what I took it as, to be honest.
All right.
If Bill dies, it would be interesting to see how the Colonel reacts to it. Maybe he becomes more emotional through that and becomes more open to the idea of not being this cold masculine figure, but being a more warm one.
Kylie.
It would be, I'm interested to see it if the mom relents and lets the older daughter get like a war job. Cause like she's like asking that, and I feel like it's like interesting that the mom's like, no, you can't go do that, even though like everyone else is doing that. And I mean,
Yeah. Well, what's the mom's resistance there? Why at first and
I
then?
mean, she wants to like her daughter to go to college and have everything that they set out for her, but there's this thing happening. Her dad's already gone because of this war happening, and I mean, if all goes well, like we know it does, she might go to college afterwards.
What?
Yeah, the Colonel's character, it's interesting because he's like this very masculine, like, no feeling sort of person. But yet he's very sensitive to like particular things. Like he's, when what's her name, the eldest daughter comes in to talk to him, he gets really offended because his breakfast is interrupted. And you would think like an actual officer would be able to, sit there and just eat breakfast and tune her out.
Yeah.
But he gets like so upset and he's, I'm going downtown. And it's like, so you are a man in one way, but you're also like pretty petty about certain things that way, and I guess that probably fits more with the character of like a bourgeois, aristocratic, middle class masculinity where it's, I can shut off emotions, I can, but I'm also gonna be like really petty about certain displays of like just etiquette and that sort of realm.
He has the thing with Brig, the youngest daughter, also in the garden where, you just keep talking about Tony. And he's like offended. You're not talking about me. You're talking about Tony. What the hell? I'm not sitting still for this. Zach, and then listen.
Going back to how work is viewed within this family specifically, I find it very interesting that none of the women, like both the mom and the mom does not want to work. She wants to do home care even though she believes she won't be good at it. And she's struggling financially because of it, enough for to have a board and to, I don't know if they're making the maid pay or just letting her live there.
That's ambiguous. It sounds like the maid is working for free because
Right.
she's just that loyal to the family.
But it's interesting to see how the mom doesn't, maybe it's her feminine ideals at the time that were trying to be pushed by the film, that women shouldn't be working, they should just be focusing on what they were doing beforehand and pretend like the war isn't really affecting them. And she's projecting that onto her daughter by not wanting her daughter to go into a war job and continue on with what they had already planned.
Yeah, I will point out that in World War I, there was that same debate of some people saying women had to support the war effort by denying themselves of all the things that they had before the war, don't buy any new clothes or anything, and, maybe go work in a factory, etc. But then other people saying, no, women have to keep our way of life alive. They have to continue exactly as it is so that when we come home, it's like nothing changed. And she's kind of caught on that, Anne is. She's like, well, what do I do? Erica. Oh, I'm sorry, listen.
I kind of have like two predictions for how it could go. One is that I think that the older daughter is gonna end up going off to work and get a war job because this is a propaganda film. So like I think that's that they're gonna like say that's what women should be doing. And then also I feel like kind of just for drama, the husband is like gonna be in some battle, like some situation where like very few people survive, and it's like there's gonna be angst that like he didn't, but then of course he's gonna come back because of the Hays Code.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you're.
I think that the oldest daughter probably isn't going to get a war job, but I think it's very realistic that like she goes to school and goes into nursing because that's something that she's talked about wanting to do. But I think it's more so because like she won't go and get a war job because her mom doesn't have a war job, and I think it would have to her mom would have to get a job first. And she said at a different part in the film that she was like, oh, I don't think I could do office work, like I really couldn't be a typer. So I think that in order for the daughter to get a job, it would have to be so bad that both of them would need to get a job.
Kylie?
I'm interested to see where the movie ends because it obviously was released before the end of the Second World War. So I'm wondering if they make it like a happy ending where rah rah rah, we won, it's all great, everything's fine, the dad's home, or if they kind of predict make a prediction or try to sell that as what's gonna happen, or if it just ends before the end of the war, the dad comes home anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting question because the film was put out in 1944, and the war doesn't end until 1945. So why? And then
I'm just thinking because this is set in the United States and stuff, and like different, Europe, especially like Britain and France, they're gonna have rationing, and they're gonna have all sorts of things where you're not gonna be able to buy stuff to support the war effort and so on. And so getting women to the workforce is gonna be a lot more like predominant and forced upon by the governments to try to get this message across. And I'm sure in the United States it's very much we want to do this, but there's also it's not as pressing because we're still we enter the war later, so we have time to prepare and so on. Also, I think there's probably a class division there too, though, because in England, even during the First World War, you have aristocratic women offering their homes up for nursing services and stuff, and everybody's kind of has that sense to muck in and get on with it, especially because they're right next to the majority of the fighting.
Yeah.
I feel like with absence of aristocracy in America, you have this sort of different class system where if you're middle class or upper middle class, you revere that a lot more than if you were in Europe, just because that's something that really sets you apart. I might be mistaken, but I think that's kind of the sense that I get out of looking at Europe and versus America.
Okay.
I agree with what Erica said, and building off of what he said, I think that the oldest daughter will not get a job and the mom will not get a war job. And my interpretation of why I believe that is that there might be a return to domesticity within the politics of this film itself, that we only needed women in the beginning of the war and towards the middle of it in order to help fuel the economy and help supplement the people leaving, but a woman's place is within the home and doing women's work.
I do think the daughter will get the job because I don't think the mom will, because the whole thing with domesticity. But the daughter is younger and part of the generation that will end up back in the home in the 60s, and will end up with that idea of femininity until first feminism helps with that. But I think she will get the job because that's what everyone else is doing, and it becomes a propaganda film. And even though the mom says, "Oh, I don't think I'm going to be any good at this," I think the movie might prove her right that she wouldn't be, but the daughter might be. I don't know.
You have any thoughts on Two and Away? We will find out today what happens. All right, any thoughts on the Jarvis reading? This Jarvis reading is definitely setting up the movie we're starting tomorrow, which is The Men, or we're watching all of it tomorrow, which is The Men. And if you were reading closely, you saw that The Man is featured in the chapter. Any thoughts on that, or what's that?
Did people actually think that like Japanese soldiers were cross-eyed?
Yes.
Did they?
Yes, that was a standard part of propaganda and images, and thick Coke bottle glasses and cross-eyed. I'm not sure why. I don't know where that came from. Actually, I probably do. It was Tojo. The Prime Minister of Japan wore thick glasses, and that probably he was probably the most famous face of a Japanese person in the United States, and they probably just sort of generalized that all Japanese people look like Tojo.
Oh yeah, that police officer, that was a very awful scene.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, I mean, it tells you just how much the Department of Defense had embraced anti-Japanese racism, that they're allowing that in propaganda films, and, but as you see in the Jarvis reading also, that terms like Jap, which sound really offensive now, are like the standard way to talk about the Japanese. They didn't, it was part of the culture. It was what it was, One other thing that I think is interesting in the Jarvis reading is just how much it had to be a conscious effort to rebuild masculinity for injured soldiers, right? The wounded soldiers were seen as a problem that Jarvis calls it abject masculinity, right? Their masculinity has been destroyed. They are no longer men, and they have to be built back up to be men according to the sort of dominant idea at the time. And this is what the Department of Defense and Veterans Administration saw as their job, was to rebuild these abject men.
Also, the thing that I just think is like a little bit disturbing was I don't remember the movie, but the one where basically he got his masculinity back and powered by basically physically abusing his
White?
Yeah.
Yeah, the flesh and Mary Duncan.
Yes, that one. And just how it's like Mary was like, oh, I want you to dominate both our lives, and I'm just reading that being like, just like trying to keep the thoughts of just like ick out of my mind. Like it. Why does physical domestic abuse have to be the thing that?
Well, this is something that is really, I think it's really hard for us to understand. And I mean, I just saw a little newspaper column. It was asking women what they thought of men treating their wives as equals, and they had a whole bunch of little interview quotes from women who are like, oh, hell no, I don't want my husband I want to know my husband's in charge. I don't want someone who's going to treat me like an equal. He's not a real man then. And so there's a real sense in which women thought masculinity meant being the dominant one in the relationship, and they saw physical violence as part of that process in a sense. Not a necessary part in the sense that it didn't always happen, but if the wife got out of line, the husband was supposed to use physical violence to put her back in line in her place. And this is, I mean, what you're talking about, the flesh and Mary Duncan, is really, I think, I couldn't find the movie. I tried. I was going to show it this class years ago, but I couldn't find it. But it's a really interesting, I mean, if you haven't read the Jarvis, basically, the guy comes home and he's got pretty much PTSD from having been through combat. He's not physically injured, but he has so much trauma that one of his arms is paralyzed. Even though he was never injured, it's paralyzed, and he can't, keep a job and get back into society, etc. And he is really sort of broken, and he finally gathers himself together enough to start working, and this really helps him feel like he's a man again because he's working, but he's still impotent. But then his wife, Mary Duncan, agrees to marry him, and they go to a party, and he thinks she's flirting with his boss. And when they get home, he confronts her, and you are flirting with him, and he hits her and then rapes her. And then she suddenly says, oh, you're cured, you're a man again. And she wants him to dominate both of their lives, etc. So she's she's longing for him to take that sort of dominant position and dominate her. But the real key to the movie is that cures him, that reasserting his dominance over his wife, and in particular over his wife's body. And the Jarvis points out a number of ways that they're really explicit that it's her body that he's taking control of, her flesh, if you follow the movie title, is the way to re-masculinize. And this is a key theme. I mean, this is the theme in The Men that we're going to watch tomorrow, which is here's a whole bunch of guys who are in a Veterans Administration hospital in California who are all paralyzed from the waist down. And how can they reclaim their masculinity? And we'll see in the movie how they do it, and it's pretty obvious. I mean, they beat you over the head with it.
What genre is that? Professional movie?
Oh, I think it's a rom-com.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
It's just the fact that would probably like something that was supposed to be like sweet, like oh wow, healing, but at least now it's like just it sounds like a horror movie.
Well, it's it was supposed to be I would call it a drama. I mean, there are a whole series of films. I don't know if you've heard of The Best Years of Our Lives, but it's a film about these four veterans who come back, and like one of them lost both his hands, and they're trying to find their masculinity, et cetera. And there was a whole genre of this sort of war veterans have to refine their masculinity, and it usually the solution is in some way dramatic. There's a moment of epiphany or awakening or what have you. So I would say it was a drama. People were expecting it. It didn't necessarily have to have a super happy ending, like tying everything up and they lived happily ever after, but it just had to be he's found himself again. And it could be that he's just starting on a new path at the end of the movie. He's not there yet, but he's now on the path, right? So it's a drama. Do you have thoughts on Jarvis or anything like that?
Like, how was that received?
The Flesh of Mary Duncan?
Yeah.
Well, it was a book first that sold well enough they bought the movie rights and made a Hollywood movie out of it.
Okay.
So I'm going to guess pretty well. Pardon?
Who's the author?
I don't remember. You can look it up. You probably could find it on Amazon, the book. You can't find the movie.
Is there did they ban the movie?
No, it just went out of print. Nobody's put it on DVD
Oh,
or
okay.
VHS. It had a theater run.
Oh, okay.
It was in theaters across the U.S. and then it was done, and nobody thought there was enough of a market for it to bother putting on a VHS, re-releasing it on VHS and
I found it
DVD.
on
eBay?
for $135.
Oh.
The book or the movie?
book.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's probably because it's been out of print for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's a very sought after book.
And I wonder who's paying $135 to read that book.
I'm finding a lot of obituaries of the real Mary Duncan, but not much about the book.
One of the other interesting things in the Jarvis that I just want to point out is that she makes an interesting point about the thin red line. She's talking about the novel, not the movie. But in the novel, Jones, I'm not sure I agree with her. I think she's overreading this a little bit, but I think she makes an interesting observation. In the novel, she says the soldiers realize that once they have gotten into the jungle, into the combat zone, they are outside of the normal realm of masculinity because bodies are injured and wounded and men are living right next to each other, and there's all sorts of the boundaries of masculinity are blown apart. And she makes the argument that, and I think you can interpret that, I think she's making a fair interpretation of what Jones says, but basically Jones says in this environment, homosexuality doesn't automatically disqualify you from masculinity, that it's okay to help a buddy out, in the tent at night, etc., because they are outside of the realm of normal masculinity. That the combat zone is, because it's a zone of bodies being destroyed and etc., it's outside of the zone. It's a form of abject masculinity already, even if you're not injured. Which I thought was an interesting point. But she makes the other point that Jones is pretty clear about, that once you're injured, you enter the twilight zone of masculinity, that you are no longer a man because you're injured. You're now, helpless or vulnerable, etc., and that your masculinity is gone, but you're still a man. You're not a woman, and so you're in a form of what Jarvis calls abject masculinity. It's a sort of failed masculinity, and Jones calls it a twilight zone. That until you're fully healed again, and if you can't fully heal, you'll never be out of it. You're sort of stuck in the zone of not really a full man, but not a man. Which I thought was an interesting point. Any thoughts about any of that? Okay. Let me talk at you a little bit. Just to remind you, tomorrow we're going to talk about the end of Since You Went Away. We'll talk about the reading, and then we will watch all of The Men, which is an hour and a half. And then, so I'm not going to lecture tomorrow. And then Friday we'll just have, we'll get together at 1. I know that seniors will have to be somewhere else at 1:30. So we will just have a sort of final thoughts on the course kind of thing. Nothing, I won't be presenting anything, or there won't be a movie, etc. So, listen.
So, is class gonna end early that day, or is it more gonna be just?
I'm assuming it'll stop when the seniors have to get up and leave. So, how many of you are seniors? Yeah.
And Jackson too.
Yeah. So, we breed too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't have my phone here at all.
Do you want us to still fill out your course evaluation? I'm assuming so, since it was sent out.
Yes,
Okay.
actually, thank you for doing that. I actually have a problem in that when you're applying for professor jobs, you usually have to send off student evaluations. But since COVID, student responses on evaluations have been so pathetic that I have classes with 25 students and I get two responses, and so they're not really representative of anything. So if you could all fill out their response, so I had this last class, at least I'll have a high rate. That'd be great.
I kind of found the ones on the chart, the blurbs, to be kind of difficult to fill out sometimes, because it's I don't know how to, I have thoughts, but I don't know which category it fits into, or...
You can write your thoughts anywhere. I mean, they ask you for comments at various points, and if it's in the wrong place, it's fine.
It is hard. Yeah.
Yes, it's part of a test. You don't get a good grade until you figure out how to navigate this evaluation form.